Hello. I'm about to start with chapter 21, but before I do that, there's a couple of things that I would just like to comment on. Some of you probably already, the time this gets online, you've already figured this out. But the test that you turned in last week they were pretty good. And the highest score was 95. The score that's recorded on Canvas includes the extra 5 points that everybody got. The extra credit is already on there too. Today, the 6th of April, you should be turning in question 1 from the Small Claims Project. I already have a few of those. The only problem that I see with what you're doing, and this is something that's very common, unfortunately I now have to address this way, and that is that you are telling me either your opinion or you're telling me that you want to prove legal conclusions instead of the facts. What I want you to do in this question 1 is figure out what facts do you need to prove. Yeah, they breached their contract. Almost all of them, there's a breach of contract in there. That's not what I'm looking for. What caused them? What made them breach that contract? What did they do wrong? Tell me the facts. Because your next assignment, question 2, which will go on the page for the 8th of April, you're going to have to tell me what witnesses you're going to need. And you need the witnesses who are able to prove the facts. And you're not going to be able to get a witness that stands up there and says they breached the contract. We know that, you wouldn't be in court. What we want to know is what exactly they did to breach that contract, okay? And so that's what I'm looking at. So it's possible that I may comment on some of you and send it back to you until you give it another try. Because the goal with these small claims assignment is not to get you the points, not to do anything. If it was in class, we would be doing it as participation. It's to try to get you to understand what it is I'm asking you. Because the whole goal in my class, Up the Business Law, is to get you to learn the concepts and then figure out how we can actually use them. So linked to that, what I would like you to do before you start reading this chapter or before you start going online to view the publisher's edition of the videos, I want you to look at the link I put on there that talks about what supply chain management is. So that just in case you don't know anything about this or you don't know what we're talking about in this chapter, it's a short video. If you watch that video, I think you'll have a better understanding of what it is we're talking about. Okay? Now, normally in class, what I do is in the last chapter, chapter 20, I teach the part about bailments, and I leave that and teach that on the same night that I teach this chapter, chapter 21. So because chapter 21 is about warehouses and it's about carriers, and really what we're talking about are special types of bailments. So it really kind of ties in with the last part of the chapter before this. So if you haven't read that chapter or you haven't read the last part of that chapter, you need to do that before you get into this chapter because it builds on it. Lots of the chapters don't do that, but this particular one does. It builds on what was at the end of the last chapter. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is just simply highlight some of the things that are in this chapter. It's a more difficult chapter maybe than some of the other ones that we've had, but if you learn the definitions, which is the biggest part of this, you should be okay. All right, so what are we talking about? Well, first of all, we're talking about warehouses. And warehouses is about storage. Carriers is about transportation. So when we're talking about warehouses, remember that we're talking about storage. And what we're talking about is an entity, a person, a business, something that is engaged in the business, because remember we're in business law, so we're talking about business. They're in the business of storing goods for someone else, some other entity, for money, for compensation of some kind. Doesn't have to be a building. I'm assuming that most of you probably think of a warehouse, you think of this big building with no windows that people put stuff in and keep it. That's not our definition here in this chapter of what a warehouse is. A warehouse doesn't have to be a building. It could be a storage unit of some kind. It could be like the ones they have on TV. It could be an open yard with a fence around it or not a fence around it. It doesn't have to be a building. The warehouse is the entity that is in the business of storing goods for money or some other form of compensation. Okay? Now, it is regulated by Article 7 of the Uniform Commercial Code, which is not an article that we get into a great deal in 1080. But it is adopted in the state of Michigan. For those of you who may be going on and need this, the citation where it starts, Article 7 in the Michigan law is NCL 440.7101. After you get that 440 in Michigan law, which is talking about the Uniform Commercial Code, the next batch of numbers talks about the article. And so these all start with a 7. It means it's talking about Article 7, and it means that that's the article that has the law in it for warehouses. In Michigan, it went into effect, the one that's in effect right now, July 1st of 2013. Okay? All right, so a public warehouse. And a public warehouse is a warehouse. Remember, we're not talking about a building. It's a warehouse that is open to the public. And if you are a public warehouse, meaning that you will store goods of people in the general public without discrimination, then you have a lien against the goods that you are storing for reasonable storage charges. Unless you have some other deal with the person you're storing the goods for, you only have the lien on the goods that you were storing. So if they have stored different lots of goods and you don't get paid, it's whichever lot you didn't get paid from, that's the lot that you have a lien on. And remember, if we have a lien, eventually what we could do is sell it, take the money that's owed to us out of the money we get from selling it and pay off our storage liens. Okay, now warehouse receipts. And attached to the outline for this chapter, there is a definition of warehouse receipts, and also bill of ladings for the next group that we get into. But it's warehouse receipts. A warehouse receipt, and there is a copy in the book that I have, and it's in this chapter on page 391 of what a warehouse receipt might look like. So I would suggest that you look at that example, and you'll notice that it is marked, 1, 2, it's got little arrows in it, and down at the bottom, it tells you what those arrows relate to. So I would suggest that you look at that. Okay, so this warehouse receipt is a written acknowledgement or record. Remember, when we start talking about records, we start talking about things that are online. Because a lot of the things now with the Uniform Commercial Code, a lot, if not most, if not all, are done online now. They're not done so much with paper, okay? So a warehouse receipt is the written record, and it's an acknowledgement by a warehouse that certain property has been received from someone that it names, and that person that it's named is called a depositor. So it's just an acknowledgement that you got these goods from this person and that you have them for storage. That's a simple definition of a warehouse receipt. It is a document of title. Okay, document of title shows the ownership of the goods. Document of title. Okay, so what are the rights of holders of warehouse receipts? Well, there's two different kinds of warehouse receipts. There is negotiable and non-negotiable. Now, in 1080, this small section here is the only place where we talk about negotiable and non-negotiable items. This is covered much more extensively in 1090. So I'm going to give you just a brief definition here that will relate to warehouse receipts or relate to the bill of lading that we talk later. But there's more to it than this, and more of the description is in 1090. Okay, so negotiable, or excuse me, let's start with non-negotiable. A non-negotiable warehouse receipts talks about, eventually when you store goods, eventually somebody is going to come and get them. You don't, the plan is not to store them into infinity. Someone is going to come and get them. So it is a non-negotiable warehouse receipt. The delivery is to a specified person. In other words, if I'm a warehouse, you put your goods in with me, I'm only supposed to deliver it to Jane. So if John shows up and says, okay, I want them, I'm supposed to deliver them to Jane. It's a non-negotiable warehouse receipt. On the other hand, there are negotiable warehouse receipts. And negotiable warehouse receipts would be delivered to bearer or to the order of bearer, meaning that the person who originally stored the goods may want someone else to have them now. They may be using it to pay a loan, because you can use documents of title. You can use them, you can buy them, you can sell them, you can use them as security for a loan. So maybe I have goods stored with you and I have this receipt from you that I got the goods stored with you, but I want somebody else to be able to come and get them and use them and apply them towards a debt that I owe them. So that would be negotiable. Now it does have to be properly endorsed. For now, all I'm going to tell you that properly endorsed means that there has to be a chain of signatures that you could trace back to the original party who deposited the goods with you. It has to be, if it's a negotiable warehouse receipt, it has to be properly endorsed. And that means that anybody who had an interest in this is going to have to sign off on it, if that's a kind of a very brief, simplified definition of this. And again, I'm not going to get into a ton because there's like a whole chapter, maybe 2 chapters in 1090 on exactly what that endorsement consists of. But for right now, all I'm going to tell you is that if it is negotiable, it has to be signed by all the appropriate parties. And for our purpose, the appropriate parties would be anybody who had an interest in those goods. Okay? And that's what we're going to do for right now. So that's a negotiable. All right, now, if it is properly signed, it's properly negotiated, then whoever has the warehouse receipt, and remember this could be online, it doesn't have to actually be a piece of paper in your hand, then they get title to the document and title to the goods. So they can come and pick them up if they want, or they could sell it to somebody else, whatever. Okay? All right, so when you are transferring a warehouse receipt, there are certain warranties that you give. And while I hate to use the word guarantee because it doesn't always come out the same way, but these warranties are, you're promising somebody that the warehouse receipt that you have is genuine, it isn't made up, it isn't fake, that the transfer is rightful, you haven't stolen it, you haven't promised it to somebody else, that the transferor, or the person who is giving it to somebody else, okay, has no knowledge of anything that would say that this warehouse receipt is no good. If it's been stolen, they don't know about it. If there's a forgery on it, they don't know about it. They have no knowledge of anything that would make that warehouse receipt bad. Okay, let's talk a little bit of what is field warehousing. Field warehousing is kind of for goods that maybe are too big to actually be moved around all the time to be where you want to store them. Let's say boats, okay? So if you want to store them, meaning you're going to have somebody else take care of them for you, you could leave them where they are. And the warehouse, the entity that's going to store them for you, just comes in and takes control of that area. We use that word kind of like intent that we use a lot throughout the law. We use this word of control a lot throughout the law. So the warehouse is going to take control of the area where the items that they're going to store are. But they're not going to move them. They're not going to take them to a building somewhere. They're just going to say, okay, they're here. Now we're the warehouse. We have our warehouse receipt. We now have control of this area. They're stored. Okay, and that's field warehousing because it's in the field. All right. Now, there can be a limitation. And obviously we've talked about this before, because anytime you're a business, if you can limit your liability, you're going to try to do that. And so a warehouse can limit their liability in their warehouse receipt. They have to specify the maximum amount that they might be liable for. They can't just say, oh, well, we're not going to be liable. They've got to say, we're only going to be liable up to this amount. And there could be some qualifications. I mean, maybe you get a higher amount if you're going to pay more for the storage. But the person who is storing the items has to know about this limitation. It can't be a surprise to them later on. They have to know about this, and they have to be given the choice of paying a higher rate of storage fees and not getting that maximum amount of liability. And the limitation has to be stated for each item or for each unit of weight, depending on what it is you're storing. Okay. As I said, this isn't a really long chapter, so. All right, so let's move on then to common carriers. Remember, warehousing is our storage. Common carriers now is transportation. And I think it might be, as I said, if you are a little confused about what these concepts are in this area, watch that other short video and it gives you kind of an understanding. All right, so we move on to carriers in transportation, and we're talking about common carriers. All right, a carrier is an individual or an organization that undertakes the transportation of goods. When we're talking in this area right now, we're not talking about what type of transportation or how far, the distance that this may be. Okay, so when we talk about carriers, we break it down into 3 different groups: common carriers, contract carriers, and private carriers. All right? A common carrier transports goods for the public without discrimination. A common carrier is going to get paid. There's nothing saying that they can't get paid, but they hold themselves out as being available to furnish transportation for compensation without discrimination to members of the public, assuming that the goods they carry are proper for them to carry and that the facilities are available to do that carrying. Okay? A contract carrier ships goods on a contract basis. So they have an individual contract for what they're going to ship. And then a private carrier is owned and operated by the shipper. Common carrier, the law that applies to them is common carrier law or special bailment law that would apply to common carriers. Contract carriers, the ones that ship things under an individual contract, are governed by ordinary bailment law, and that's the part that was in the end of the last chapter. Private carriers, because this is a method of shipment where the private carrier owns and operates the shipping, that they're governed by employment law because they are the employer of the people that are doing the shipping. All right, so those are the three type things that you need to keep in your mind. Common carriers, contract carriers, and private carriers. Okay, now, when we're talking about carriers, we're not talking anymore about warehouse receipts, we're talking about a bill of lading. And a bill of lading is, it's the shipper, it's what you get. It's a document of title, and it's a bill of lading if we're talking about land or water transportation, and it's an air bill if you're talking about air transportation. It is a document of title. It can also be negotiable or non-negotiable, meaning that you can have just one person that is going to be able to get this, or you can transfer it to other people. It is a transfer of title by transferring the bill of lading with the intent to transfer title. Okay, the warranties that you get with bill of ladings are the same as you do with the warehouse receipts. All right, and that is that the bill of lading is genuine, the transfer is rightful, and that the person who's transferring it has no knowledge of anything that would make that bill of lading invalid. They don't know anything bad in the history of that document. Okay, now of course a carrier, and we're talking about a common carrier here, a common carrier has certain duties, and their duties are to receive and carry proper and lawful goods for anybody who offers them for shipment, as long as they have space and the person is willing to pay for it. They have to furnish facilities that are adequate for the transportation of freight in the usual course of business. They have to agree that they will follow and do it. They have to follow the directions of the shipper, the person who is giving them the goods to transport. They have to load and unload the goods that are delivered to it for shipment, unless by custom or by contract there's some other deal that they have made about who loads and unloads. And then they have to deliver the goods according to their contract for shipment. So, if their contract is that they're going to deliver the goods to Detroit, it's not okay to take them to Windsor. All right, now the liabilities of a common carrier. Okay, if the goods are given to them for immediate shipment and they're in transit, the carrier is absolutely liable. Unless, and the book lists them out, there are some exceptions to that rule. One of being a force majeure, which sometimes used to be called like an act of God, but now usually they don't call it that anymore. It's a natural phenomenon, not reasonably foreseeable. And there's a few others that are like that. There are things that are maybe something you would not have expected to have happen, or wouldn't ordinarily have happened. But if that's not the case, then they have an absolute liability if their goods are for immediate shipment and they're in transit and they're damaged. Okay? A carrier is liable for losses if it fails to deliver the goods within a reasonable amount of time. The shipper assumes the risk of ordinary delays that are part of transporting goods. Okay? Then, if there's no statute or constitutional prohibition, the common carrier has the right to limit its liability in the contract. The same as with those warehouse receipts where we say the warehouse person has the right to limit their liability. A common carrier also has the right to limit its liability. But the shipper, the person sending the goods out for transport, has to be given a reasonable opportunity to buy excess liability coverage for a higher value of their shipment. So the carrier can limit their liability. The shipper has to know about that, and what they're limiting their liability for is negligent loss of the goods, and the shipper has to then be given an opportunity to purchase their own insurance, a higher level of insurance to protect themselves. Okay, and Shipping is a really complex, it sums it down here in like 3 or 4 sentences. This is really a much more complex issue than it makes it out to be here. But you know just the highlights of what it is they're talking about when they're talking about warehouses and carriers. Okay? Generally speaking, the carrier, if there's going to be a claim for damages or for loss of the goods, the carrier has to be given notice. And they have to know about that before, to see if they can resolve it, to see what's going on. Okay? And generally speaking, it says here it's generally 9 months that they have to do this notification. All right. A COD shipment, which is cash on delivery, which I guess I'm just assuming that most of you know or have heard of a COD delivery before. But the cash on delivery is a little bit different because cash on delivery means that the shipment there can be no delivery until payment's received. If they turn over the goods and the money has not been received, that's a problem. So typically because if it's a COD delivery, either the person you're delivering it to's credit is not established yet, or it's not very good, or they don't quite trust them that they're going to get their money. So they want to make sure that they're going to get paid. And generally speaking, a COD payment is going to be cash, or it's going to be a guaranteed money, such as a certified check or a cashier's check. Okay. Now, factors is a consignment sale, and actually they talk about this in a much more extensive way in another chapter later on in the book. So all I'm going to tell you about the factors here is that it's a special type of bailee who sells consigned goods. But selling on consignment is discussed later in another chapter, and we're going to talk about it in that chapter. Because these consignment sales are treated as a sale and return under Article 2, and we have a few chapters to go yet before we actually get to Article 2. So we're going to talk about it then. All right, which leaves us to be talking here about hotel keepers. There is a difference between a hotel keeper, an innkeeper, and landlord. And that's where the issues come in this section here, all right? A hotel keeper is someone who is regularly in the business of offering living accommodations to transient persons. Now, this may not be the definition of the word transient that you might ordinarily use, but transient means this isn't their residence. This isn't where they're living on a regular basis. This is where they're going to stay a few nights, maybe a few weeks, but the idea is that it's going to be a turnover. They're going to keep going, that it's living accommodations to transient persons. That's what a hotel keeper is. Their guest is transient. Okay? I mean, we don't care where they come from, how far away, anything like that. But it doesn't matter. It's just that they are not going to be there paying monies on an extended period of time who pays a regular sum of money. When that happens, then the issues become, okay, when did they become a tenant as opposed to a transient? Because if they become a tenant, if they are paying an amount of money to stay there like every month, if they pay a certain amount of money to stay there every week, and this has become their residence, then these laws that we're going to be talking about in just a second about hotel keepers don't apply. Then they have to go through, if they want to get them out, they have to go through the eviction process. And it's much different than someone who is there not on a regular monthly, weekly payment basis, who've established a residence there. Okay? The hotel keeper has a bailee's remember from the last chapter, liability for goods entrusted to them. And if you ever go into a hotel room, you'll notice on the back of the door all the time there's a little notice to you, because every state seems to have different rules about what it is that the hotel keeper is going to be liable for. And I've noticed from reading most of these, what it says is that if you were to go to the front desk and give them something and they accepted it and they put it into like the hotel safe, okay, you have entrusted it to their care. You leave it in your room, that's not, you have not entrusted it to their care. So you leave expensive camera equipment in your room, most places, in fact, I don't know where this isn't true, it's the hotel is not going to be responsible if that is stolen, because it was not entrusted to their care and they didn't accept it. And if you read that little sign on the door, and I know it's always in very small print, that's what it says. It tells you that they're not liable. Okay, now, do they have a lien? Yes, they do. A hotel keeper, not a landlord, a hotel keeper has a lien on a guest's property if they don't pay their bill. And they could take it and sell it. They can lock you out of your room. They can take your personal possessions, sell them, use any money they get from that sale towards your bill. If it comes to more than you owe, they have to give you the balance. If it comes to less, then they might sue you for the difference. They don't have to, but they might. Okay, but that becomes sometimes a real issue in court if the person is what the book refers to as a boarder or a lodger, what we might talk about here as being a tenant. They can't take their stuff then if they're a tenant, and that is a defense. If somebody was to say, well, I was your hotel keeper and I took your stuff and I kept it, a defense would be, no, you weren't. I had established a residence there. I was paying you rent on an equal basis. I wasn't giving you it every day or a couple of days, or I had a regular schedule set up there and this was my residence now. Then you don't have the right to come in and take my stuff and sell that and use that to pay any monies that I might owe to you. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. As I said, it's really kind of a very short chapter. The next one that we go into is going to be the nature of sales. It actually gets us started into Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, and that's pretty much then what we're going to be talking about from then until the end of the semester is Article 2. If you have any questions, again, and I have been getting some from people and I try to respond as much as I can. If texting or emailing just looks like it's not getting me anywhere, then I'm going to give you a call and try to talk you through it. But so far, nobody wants to be the small remodeling company. But other than that, people are picking their assignments, letting me know what they are, and some people have chosen to work together. As I said before, that's fine. The next assignment that you will have will be put on online on the Wednesday, that's the 8th, and then it will be due the following Monday. It will be about witnesses. If you don't understand the assignment, make sure you let me know. Thank you.